Hello there, and welcome to Sync Music Matters, a podcast that explores the beautiful relationship between music and the moving image. My name's Jim Hustert, and I'm your host on this journey, as each week I seek to explore the people and the process behind the best music in TV, film and games. I'm talking to composers, but I'm also talking to editors, supervisors, directors, and anyone else who's involved with the synchronous process of pairing audio and visual. Ryan Dickinson has spent the last 10 years working within the advertising and video game industries as a creative director, music composer, and sound designer. He's worked for world-renowned companies such as MassiveMusic, EA Games, and Squeak. He's also worked on sonic branding, helping to craft award-winning sounds for brands such as Kathmandu, the Australian Open, and Canva, winning gold and silver Transform Awards. He has recently set up his own company, Made by Ikigai, which is a full-service music and sound agency. Ikigai is a Japanese term that blends two words, Iki meaning to live and Gai meaning reason, which translates to a reason to live. It's a concept that encourages people to discover what truly matters to them and to live a life filled with purpose and joy. Ryan, thanks for joining me.
Hey Jim, yeah, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. First question as always, if we were to rewind to a young Ryan growing up on the mean streets of the Gold Coast, if someone had asked you what would you like to be when you grow up, what would you have replied?
Depends which year of my childhood you asked me, but most likely it would have been Dave Grohl from Nirvana. Probably that would have been the response. Drummer in music was always my thing. Ever since, I think, the age of 12, I picked up a pair of drumsticks and I became obsessed from then, for my entire life. But drumming was definitely a huge focus for a solid 15 years there. And Dave Grohl was my hero. Yeah,
specifically Dave Grohl. I've got his autobiography lying around here somewhere, which I've still not read.
Oh, right.
Yeah. What were some of the other things? Because you mentioned there was a few.
It was always music, to be honest. It just depended which style, which person, which instrument, depending on which time of my life that you asked me that question. But music was always the thing for me. I was never much good at many other things. I always enjoyed listening to music, dancing. My dad was a DJ in the 70s and 80s and even owned nightclubs. And I think I remember my dad used to do mobile discos, and my mum would sometimes come with him when she was pregnant with either myself or my sister, and he needed to go for toilet breaks occasionally, which we always need to do as DJs. Sometimes mum would take over on the turntables and press play on the next record for me, and as far as I know, I was in the womb when that was occurring at times. So disco music was built into my DNA, you might say.
I was going to say you're absorbing it in utero, absorbing disco music. That's incredible. And do you have a strong affinity for disco now?
Not a strong affinity for disco. I definitely enjoy it, but it's funny that I ended up in dance music. So I guess the modern version of disco, the 4/4 beat, was something that took up a large part of my adult life, and still does. So I guess there's a correlation there in some way.
Nice. So started on the drums. Talk us through how that went, because presumably that was just as a hobby. What was the progression from enjoying music in your free time to it becoming a profession?
I think it was really the first part, the obsession of drums, was finally finding something that I was naturally good at. And I'd tried quite a few instruments before then, but finding something that I really took to instantly and was quite good at and saw a rapid progression in my skill level, gave me something to focus on, kind of gave me an identity. And it was always, I guess I saw, like many people, there was only really one pathway, which was in those days in the 90s and 2000s was bands, not so much DJs. And I wasn't a big electronic music fan back in those days. So it was be in a band, get a record deal, tour, And that was the only way really that there was a pathway to making a living out of music. And after bands and when I got into DJing, the pathway was pretty much the same thing, but just replace band with DJing. It was, write music, record music, release music, tour, and get a record deal. That's how you make a living out of making music. And I didn't really know any other pathways, any other opportunities. I think that was probably it. You either make it or you don't. And you scrape along at the bottom for a long period of time and give every inch of your time and money and focus to that. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed all of it, but the allure of making a living off it, I think it's a little bit of a dream that the music industry sells to make money off a lot of hungry and passionate musicians. So I always had a job. I never lived off making music until quite late in my life. I would say I was in my 30s, early 30s, 31 or so, and I took some time off. I went backpacking for 6 months. I gave myself some clear space to really think about what I wanted in life. I wasn't enjoying my full-time jobs. I wasn't... I just was I knew what I loved doing. And after taking some time out to reflect, I realized that what I need to do in my lifetime, with the majority of time that I'm awake and functional and focused, is do the thing that I enjoy doing, which is music and sound. I just had to figure out a way that I could do that. And I'd been through the music industry kind of more or less solidly once, loosely a couple of times, where I'd really given it a good run, and came out the other side, and like many people was quite jaded by the whole process and run out of steam and just needed to take a break out of all of it and think about what else there was in life. But for me, there was never really anything else other than music and sound. It was always my passion, and I knew in my bones that that's what I needed to do, and I just needed to figure out how to get there. So in that time off, I spent some time thinking about what else is there in terms of music, sound, every facet of it. What if I'm not going to be Dave Grohl? Like, how do I make a living out of doing something using the skills that I have? And audio post-production, sound design was something that I don't know at what point it popped into my head during this backpacking trip, but it sort of popped up as, well, I'm watching this TV show, I'm watching this movie, there is sound on it. Someone must do that. There has to be someone getting paid to do this. So I just started Googling and figuring it out. I didn't know the word sound design. I didn't know the word audio post-production. I just sort of started off down a black hole of research and found that, yes, this is a profession and people can just get paid a salary to do it, and you can turn up to work Monday to Friday and get paid to do these things and create sounds and record voices. So I just dove into research and figuring out that world. And that was really the start of me making a full-time living from music and sound.
What were you doing in terms of the sound design on a day-to-day basis? Was it, presumably this wasn't Foley, or was it?
Some of it was. It was everything. So my first full-time job was at a video game company, and the second one was inside an advertising agency. And because the nature of because I wasn't at the, say, Hollywood movie level where the tasks are really broken down, there is a team just doing Foley, there is someone just doing dialogue editing, there's someone just doing sound effects and air and different elements. But when you're talking about someone just working on a single short advertising film or within a small video game company, you kind of have to figure out all the elements. And it's actually what I love doing anyway. Later on, I went to Peter Jackson's facility in New Zealand and went and checked out the studios there, which is Park Road Post-Production. Unbelievably impressive setup. But what was clear to me was, you have to really get segmented into very small parts of the sound, and you have to be willing to just sit and focus on this 30-second part of a film for weeks, and then the director may cut it tomorrow, and what I liked was the idea of really having control over an entire world and a quick burn, and just figuring out all those elements together, and get the voice recorded, get the footsteps in there, get the explosion, get the wind in the background, get the music coming out of that speaker in the top left, and all of that variety in sound was something that really appealed to me. I didn't know it at the time. I was just taking any job I could, but once I figured out years later, and it kind of came to almost like a crossroads of which way do I want to head, it was, no, I really do enjoy what I'm doing on this side of the fence in the advertising world, where it's fast burning projects and I get more control over the whole kind of world of sound. But yeah, so on a day-to-day, let's say my first job at, I guess I'd probably go to the one at Ogilvy, which is inside advertising agency, where that was I was in a fast-paced, moving day-to-day, and there was a lot of voiceover records, and most of my career was a lot of voiceover records, voiceover editing and directing, and that's the largest element. And then music editing, maybe music treatment, depending if the script required for the music to sound something other than just laid over the top. And then whatever else it needed. And I kind of figured out things as I went quite a lot as well. Just watching a scene and trying to understand why it didn't feel real, like the sound wasn't what I needed. And I remember one thing that I learned by desperation almost, was the Foley element of just the clothing movement, just when the camera is quite up close, and just the act of just moving your arms at the same time as the actor, and that very soft, subtle fabric, just, it's you wouldn't even notice it unless you were a sound designer, but when it's not there, it's not believable. And the other one was putting air into the background and putting room sounds in. Again, it's just noise, and it doesn't have to sound like a city. It can literally be the hiss of an air conditioner or nothing. But it definitely makes the difference between reality and not reality. And all these things were things I just kind of more or less figured out on the fly. I definitely had a few friends to call here and there, but you just kind of sit there over and over again trying to work out why it doesn't feel real. And then when you strike that gold, you can put that in the bank and move on. But
yeah, it's interesting. When the first time I ever sat in on a post-production session, that was one of the first thing I noticed, was the fact that they were putting white noise behind the whole thing, because, as you say, it adds that ambience, but also what it helped to do is, because you were cutting between different environments, and obviously where the background noise was different, it helps mask any major differences in the background noise. And we were actually having a conversation in the studio this week. There's quite a few filmmakers and videographers here, and they were saying, actually, quite often people, when they're making content, they worry a lot about, or short films, whatever, they worry a lot about the camera, the lenses, etc. But actually, they were saying it would be better to make sure you get good sound, because that goes for that's more important in their mind. And they're filmmakers and they're visually led, but they say that in terms of creating a realistic, believable world, the sound is more important than having great lenses.
It helps sell a lot, and even going further, I mean, I've been on set recording the sound on set, and a good sound recording mixer, someone on set will make sure that the entire cast stops for a moment, everyone shuts up, and they just record the silence in that room of where they've been recording. And so you have the actual room tone of where you're recording, and having these kind of things all just completely sell the whole thing. Once you get to chopping a lot of voice and there's things going on in the background, and then you can just mix in the actual noise of the room to mask a few things and gel it all together, it really helps. But yeah, it's getting quite nerdy with on the audio side here already.
It's all about audio nerdery. And I think what's really nice as well about your story as well, Ryan, obviously we're going to talk about Made by Ikigai later, but even back then when you were looking at what you wanted to do, that concept of passion and purpose, and you wanting to make sure that you, if as an idealist, if you're going to spend most of your life or a third of your life working, you want to do something that you brings you joy. So even back then you were thinking, okay, so even though Made by Ikigai has only just come about, the concept of Ikigai was something that you were embracing even when you were looking at your options as a young man.
Well, I think, like I said, this was, I think around 31 that I reached this point, and it was almost through like desperation in a way of just being quite unhappy, and just trying to just almost having, when you reach that point, you just let go of consequence to some decisions, like I wouldn't have just normally, in a normal world, I wouldn't just quit my job without a job to go to. It's just, that's nuts. Like Ryan in his 20s, no way. Ryan now in my 40s, like I'd recommend anyone to do it, because if you have something you want to pursue, or, if you're unhappy and you want to get into doing something that you love, like diving off into the deep end and taking away a safety net, it forces you to make it work, and you do. I think most people, I found gears that I didn't know I had when I took away the safety net, and now I know those gears are in me, and I use them regularly. I'm happy to take the safety net away from me. It was the same with starting up this company, and just going, I'll figure it out, I'll make it work because I have to. And what you manage to pull together when you just have to is really incredible.
Absolutely. And it's funny, it's just having faith, isn't it? And you mentioned earlier off mic, you talked about trusting the universe, and there's a certain amount of surrender and just trusting that you'll find a way to make it work. Because similarly, I was quite late to the music game. I quit my full-time marketing job to do music full-time I was probably about 30. And it's a huge leap of faith. But as you say, it lights a fire, and it's do or die, it's sink or swim. And hopefully if you've got the resources. With that in mind, I'm conscious, because I have a lot of contact with, because I run an internship, but there's a lot of young people who want to do an internship, who are aspiring composers or looking to get into the music industry in some way, shape or form. Given that you've done what you've done, what would be your advice to anyone of how to make it work?
I think as much as possible, think outside the box. You need to break through. There is a lot of competition. I wouldn't say noise. Like there's a lot of people seeking those same opportunities as you, and virtually the qualifications between any one person are not hugely different. I guess some people are much more talented than others. Some people are more charismatic than others. And I guess it's like finding the talent that you have and relying upon that. But, for me, and I've mentioned this a few times to different friends in terms of my own path, I was, just applying for jobs, job searching, looking for anyone that was looking for a sound designer, a music composer, and seeing the qualifications outside of what I had, or applying and putting my best foot forward and writing the best cover letter I could. And I remember I even recorded like a radio show talking about my CV. I had two people together and we were talking about my experience and just sending in a recorded radio show. But little did I know that a producer at a radio station is not an engineer. There's someone that puts together the shows, and that wasn't what I was applying for. I was applying as I thought as a music producer. In my mind, a producer made music and or made sound. So I learned lessons along the way, but thinking outside the box was something that I thought about, and when I was getting no replies, no feedback, no nothing, I just added, and I'd taken my safety net away by this point, which forces you to do things that you wouldn't think of doing normally. And I just kind of went, well, I know exactly where these companies are. Like the address is here. The person I want to speak to is 15 minutes walk from me. I just can't break through this barrier of my email in their inbox. So I just physically went to these places and turned up and brought a little gift box along with me and said a quick hello. And that proved to be the best idea I ever had. That's what my whole career's been built on, is just by going around, and I still do that. And that's how I'm building Made by Ikigai now, is just going around to different cities in person, doing my research, not just dear sir, madam, but knowing the person I want to speak to and understanding the company that they work for and making it personal. And it doesn't work 100% of the time, but it works much better than 100 emails. It's absolutely guaranteed. So that worked really well for me. And I just kind of found my way. I just thought of different ways to get around that. And for some people, running a podcast is a great idea, because you can reach out to people that are in the industry and have a great chat with them. And you've made a contact. The whole thing of my boxes, whatever it is, it's about having a conversation and being a person to the person that has some sort of leverage in the industry that you're trying to break into. And not every single person is going to be able to help you, have the time or the want, but some people will. And it's just about becoming a person to those people.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's essentially what this podcast is about, is creating a context for conversation, and hopefully finding inspiration and within that. What you're talking about as well there is that idea of doing things a bit differently, being irreverent in your approach. And it also kind of ties in with making yourself stand out. How important is brand in all of this? And obviously you're a good person to ask, having worked in advertising. And this is a conversation I was having with Sam Stockham, who's a music supervisor at Involved Publishing. But with music, but also with what you're talking about, is setting yourself out from the crowd. Once upon a time, branding was the preserve of companies, but increasingly branding is an individual thing, possibly fueled by social media. But how important is the brand? And obviously with Made by Ikigai as well, which we're going to get into later. How important is brand within this scape of growing a business and growing a reputation and standing out from the crowd?
Yeah, I think exactly like you mentioned, I think personal branding is the most important thing these days. I think people want to understand on a deeper level the people that they're working with, and not so much approaching the company these days, or at least there's a much larger range of people that are more wanting to work with the person, or understand a bit more deeply what the ethos is and what they're about, what they've worked on before, or what their personality is. Some people have, when it gets to a level of business at the top where a giant company will work with a giant company and that's kind of it. But there's a huge middle ground there, which is really about personal branding and people wanting to work with that person in particular, or the world that person is representing or has created. And yeah, I do think it's a very big thing. It was something with Made by Ikigai. Kind of every element around it, I'd put a lot of thought into it, and I kind of wanted to make sure it represented me, what I stood for, what I hoped it could be, righting maybe some wrongs I saw in the industry, or just doing my little bit around it, and being part of what I saw to be the good mob or the good crew, and just kind of doing what I could, and not always in my own best interest in terms of business, but I think in the end maybe that ends up being in your own in your best interests, but making decisions that were not strictly from a money grabbing sort of setting, but more of just building up something that I thought was sustainable and a good energy, and something that I enjoyed doing with people I enjoyed working with and treating them fairly. And in a perfect world, working with clients I enjoyed working with. Of course, when you're starting out, you sort of will probably take on most jobs. But my whole thing was to lower my overheads so that I could hopefully get a little more picky about what I took on early on in the process. But yeah, as you said, I think branding is super important, especially personal branding. I think anyone, especially if they're coming up in the industry, you don't really have to be someone to stand for something or and I think people, regardless of whether your show reel is hot or you've worked with global brands, if you can put out there a set of morals, a vibe, a hunger, a positive energy, a lot of people will be drawn to that.
Under the skin. We've touched on Ikigai already, but what's your relationship to this philosophy, and why was that? Why did you settle on that as the name, Made by Ikigai, as the name of the company?
Yeah, so Ikigai, the concept, I'm not sure exactly when it came into my life, but it was fairly recently. It was maybe only 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm not sure when it came into my life, but as I dug into it, it was one of those things where every aspect of it spoke to me. And it turns out like I'd kind of already made that Ikigai decision 10 years earlier. I just hadn't seen it's not a rule book, but like I hadn't seen it laid out in this really clear and concise way. And what it is this idea of something you're passionate about, something you're good at, something that the world needs, and something you can make a living off. And where these 4 things come together is your Ikigai. So it's not your hobby, it's not your job, it's kind of what you love doing in life, but also make a living from. And when I was thinking about setting up my own company, I'd kind of been living my own Ikigai for quite a while, for the last few years, but there was always some things around it that weren't exactly as I would like, or I even found myself in periods of quite unhappiness through other circumstances in my work, even though I was doing the thing that I loved. So I sort of just took everything I could think of, every element around working, and wanted to just set it up in a way that made me personally happy in every respect that I could think of, and treated other people as well as I could so that I was a positive and happy energy in their worlds as well. And yeah, I mean, I've more or less, like I said, music's been my life. I've been working full time in music or sound for around a decade now, and I've more or less not really worked a day since that 10 years. And this was a case of, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I'll do every element I can think of that's going to just make the maximum amount of happiness in my day-to-day work, and something that, as long as I'm happy doing what I'm doing, it'll be sustainable. As long as it's sustainable, it'll be successful, because you only fail at something when you give up or stop doing it. It might not be crazy successful anytime soon. It could take a while, a few years. But as long as I'm enjoying that process, it's not about the end goal of becoming quote unquote successful. It's just leading a sustainable lifestyle, doing what I enjoy doing, and not dreading the alarm going off in the morning, but sort of leaping out of bed to get up and do what I love doing. And that was kind of the idea behind it.
Okay. Do you set goals?
Not so much. Someone asked me, like, what's your goal for the company in the first year? And it was really, I just thought of a logistical thing, and it was really just if I can have more money coming in than going out, that's my first goal. That would be year one, if that's possible at the end of year one. It's been a successful year one. I'm more about setting healthy processes in place and keeping myself accountable. And I set myself tasks, a lot of tasks. But I guess the question is, like, where does a goal, when does it become a goal, and when is it actually just a to-do list, if you know what I mean? Like, so of course I set up many things that I think need doing in the year, and things like, if the goal was to win an award, or the goal was to bring in this giant client, it's not a thing that you can just do. That's not tick that box and I did it. There's a lot of tasks involved to get there. There's a lot of things you need to set up in place. there's many things. And then if you break down every one of those into each one of the tasks that go into each one of those larger ones, and then you break down each one of those smaller tasks into how many hours of the day go into each part of it. That's kind of Kaizen is another Japanese philosophy that's been a huge part of my life. It came into my life around the same time as Ikigai. And Kaizen is this idea of improving a little bit every day at something, just very small incremental gains at something. Or I also take it as the idea of breaking down a very large goal into very small bite-sized pieces and being consistent and being regular and relentless at ticking off those goals and those small tasks. And yeah, Kaizen has been, Ikigai kind of gave me the guiding light as to where I want to go, and Kaizen's given me the way to get there, if you will. Because a lot of these goals or tasks that I laid out for myself were, that I just couldn't even imagine how I was going to how long would it take to do these things. But then once I broke it down to the very smallest degree to hours and sometimes minutes, and laid that out with a consistent approach, I'd find myself a month later doing something that I thought would take 6 months. And it was, a really huge help for me.
Yeah, it brings to mind, there's a meme that I look at from time to time of a person standing at the bottom of sort of 100 stairs, and it just seems overwhelming. But actually, if you just focus in on one step at a time, or day by day, then actually all it takes is 100 days. And it's, that perspective. And that's why I ask about the goal setting as well, because it sounds like you're very process oriented, which, it's about enjoying the journey, isn't it, rather than striving for the destination. But at the same time, somebody asked me not that long ago I can't remember what my ideal project was or what my goal was, and I was like, I didn't really have one to bring to mind. And then I was like, well, oh God, is that a shortcoming? Should I have lofty goals? Should I be goal setting? But then at the same time, trying to balance that with just being a bit more present and day to day and process driven rather than end result driven. And you mentioned you sort of holding yourself to account. How do you do that? Do you have sort of certain practices where you sort of check in to see, okay, am I staying true to my philosophy? Am I staying true to what it is I want to achieve?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was literally just on the Excel document before we jumped on for a chat, and just noting myself that I'd let my February planning slip a little bit because I was so busy. But I've been, ever since early last year, I kind of got pretty regimented at booking in time before the end of the month to plan out my following month, and just writing out, letting my brain kind of dump, if you will, kind of everything. I laid out almost like a year plan from the start, which was just kind of putting down anything that I thought I would need for the company to have, to do, to set up, and then start to kind of organize those in a bit of a timeline, what needs to happen first before that, and then blocking those into different months. And then as I got closer to each month, then I kind of took those larger tasks and broke those down into separate fields that had many tasks within them, sometimes 10 or 15 different ones. And it could be A to C. If it was something that was in terms of going through, say, composers, it would be A to C. And that might just be for 1 month if it was a very large task that needed doing for each one. And blocking out something that my partner taught me, because she works as a project manager, was estimating my time on those tasks. And checking in as to how my estimations were at the end of the month, so I could get a feel for, where I undershot or overshot. But I really what I adopted quite early on was trying not to put too much in, because the whole thing of Kaizen was this positive reinforcement, this flowing energy of, I did that thing and I did that and I did that, and tomorrow I'll do that. And it wasn't like, oh, I needed to get to that today, but I didn't, and that's really upsetting, and now I'm behind, and now the days are stacking up and all these tasks are building up in the day. So I'd really just block out, I'd allow myself 3 hours per day of kind of my Kaizen tasks, if you will. And the rest of my day was down to the jobs that came in, the work that needed doing, emails, health, life, anything else. And then I'd look at a month coming up and I'd block out realistically, okay, I'd try not to do weekends where I could. And I'd look at weekdays, and if I was traveling, I would realize that I'm not going to be able to do anything while I'm on holidays, and I shouldn't. So I just look at how many days I had for that month, that's times 3 hours per week. And then I'd see, okay, I have 60 hours to play with this month. And then I put my tasks in, I estimate my hours, and I'd see my estimated hours clock up to 60, and then I'd realize, okay, I've got a lot more things here than I think are actually possible in 60 hours. So now I have to prioritize, take some things out, move them to the month after. And that worked really well for me, and just green boxing each one of those items as I tick them off. And I was just literally earlier just going through, and I hadn't updated my January boxes, but I managed to do all of them, which was good because it was a very intense month, not just because of that, but yeah. So that was my approach to it.
Yeah, I love it. It's historically I've been a bit of a fly by the seat in my pants kind of guy, but I've recently been much more intentional in the way that you're talking about in terms of planning time and allocating resources. And I think it makes me much more effective, I think. Are you familiar with the term essentialism, or the book Essentialism? It sounds quite similar to what you're talking about. So I think it's Greg McKeown, and he talks about essentialism, and he's essentially the idea of not doing more today than you can feasibly recover from today. And I think this stems from I think his daughter became very ill, and his days were so busy and so rammed full of to-dos that he had no bandwidth or energy left to deal with family emergencies or issues. So it was the idea of managing that and leaving yourself time and space that you don't have to sort of fill every minute of every day. Are you good at taking time off?
Yeah, I think so. It depends. I go through waves. Like since the launch of the company just last month, I mentally prepared myself and my partner and just said, look, first quarter, your first 4 months or so, it's going to be like, this will be me really throwing myself into it. And then I'll get back to a more balanced lifestyle. But in general, I like to take breaks when I'm on vacations, for instance. I love traveling. And I definitely see the value of making time in your day for exercise, getting enough sleep each night, trying to build time in to cook a nice meal, or go out for dinner on the weekends. It's definitely something that I understand the value of, and most of my life I'm pretty good at it. And every now and then I kind of look at chunks where I just got to strap in, and I'm doing what I love anyway, so it's not a bad thing that I'm doing a lot of it. But just kind of there's little periods of your life where you've maybe got to let the balance go a little bit. And so, Made by Ikigai, it's also obviously worth mentioning One Stop Music, which is this sort of music library arm of your business as well. With the two of them, sort of chat about the two of them a little bit in terms of Made by Ikigai is a full service music agency. Where will it have a focus? Where do you see? Obviously, we've talked about not necessarily setting goals, but where do you see it going? What do you see its sort of primary driver to be? So the advertising market is the market that I've worked in for years, and so that's the market that we're generally focused in. Of course, I'm open to working in film or TV, wherever it makes sense to be doing it, but that's the area that I understand and I'm comfortable in. And then in terms of like what the offerings are, music's always been my passion, and getting back to being a creative director in music at MassiveMusic for about a little over 3 years before making this jump. It was definitely, I never thought I'd make a full-time living out of music again, even though I'd been in sound design for 5 years or so. It was eye-opening for me to spend my days doing what I was truly passionate about. I really, really enjoyed my sound design, audio post-production days. Like I love turning up to work every day, but when I got music involved in it again, it was like, oh, well, now it's like hitting the apex of what I really love doing. So wherever possible, the projects that involve music are the ones that I enjoy the most. But really, music and sound in general is anything music and sound related is what I'm interested in doing. The ones that have a bit more creative, something to bite down on, is definitely things that I enjoy. And sonic branding was a world that I worked in for about just over 3 years. And it was a world that I really enjoyed as well. I needed to take a little bit of time off from it, having just sort of been more or less only focused on it for quite some time. But that idea of synthesizing a brand in music and sound and diving in deeper and opening up this whole kind of world of how do you express sentiments and emotions through any form of music and sound, and just really going deep on that was a really interesting thing that I enjoyed a lot, and I definitely will get back into doing again soon when the right project turns up.
And it's probably worth just clarifying for anyone listening who doesn't know what sonic branding is. We're talking about essentially the sonic identity of a brand. So the most obvious one that springs to mind would be Netflix, wow, and HBO, and everyone, they've got the logo appears and then the sonic identity that comes with it. It seems to be becoming more prevalent. Do you feel like it's a growth industry?
Oh, it was a huge growth industry. It probably still is, but I think it's slowed down its growth. It was booming for probably solid 10 years there. But, there's only so many global brands in the world, and once they've all got a sound and a sonic strategy, there's not many more people to do it for. But there's always new brands coming out and ones that haven't done it yet. But I think it's something that's slowing a bit. I kind of feel like it as much as it was sold as a full sonic strategy for companies, what it started to turn into was just bing bongs for a little mnemonic at the end, and there wasn't much else going into it. Even if internally there was a full strategy sold, you just didn't really find it coming through with companies, like having a specific voice or an aesthetic, or finding the same sound and music in every touch point you find for a brand. I don't know if the promise of sonic branding was delivered enough times over, rather than just the actual bing bong at the end. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's an important part of a branding exercise. I 100% see the value in it, and I guess even if it's a bing bong, that still does a thing. It's still a brand recognition tool. But yeah, it's a market that a lot of people are doing now. So maybe it hasn't slowed down. Maybe just a lot of people are doing it, and so there's a little bit less for all of the people that were doing it.
And sort of to a similar end, how do you feel like advertising has changed in the last 5 or 10 years? Certainly with I know quite a few people working in television, and I think last year particularly was quite a difficult year for television. It seems to be less shows are getting commissioned, partly because a lot of the time less advertising revenues coming in. Sort of having worked within the advertising industry, how do you feel it's changed, and where do you feel like it's going?
Yeah, budgets have shrunk lots. And I've only been in the industry for 10 years, but they were already shrinking when I started, and they've shrunk since then. And even in the last 3 or 4 years, I think the curve is becoming exponential in terms of budgets becoming tighter. And really I think a lot of social media, people, it's more about content these days than eyes on TVs. So it's just changing the landscape of what advertising is. And I think people are having to adapt and figure out new ways to create things for smaller budgets. But I see it kind of similar to the music industry, and we had a very healthy market in vinyl and CDs, and a lot of people making a lot of money out of that, and then streaming coming through, and a lot of people trying to figure out, a period where no one was really making much money at all, and then streaming coming through, and this becoming a new avenue and the way that people consume music. but it's still never going back to how it was, and not really a sustainable living from just streaming alone. So musicians and artists need to figure out different ways that they can make money out of how they do it, and almost becoming a brand in themselves, and the whole kind of landscape changing, but the need for music not changing. And I think it's the same with the advertising market. There'll always be companies wanting to put their brand in front of people, and wherever they're consuming media or anything, or their eyes or ears are focused. And it's just a case of what that is and how people, I mean, it'll be soon, you'll be in some sort of a virtual world, and people will be finding ways to put their brands in front of you there. And, social media will be something completely different than it is now. And who knows, there might be more money in there once again, because you're not advertising to a region, a single country, but you're just in the multiverse or whatever it is. Your market is truly global, with global eyes in every room that they could be in. Like it will continue to change, but the need for it, or the market for it, won't change. Same as people consuming art, brands will still want to put their brand in front of people.
Yeah, and I'm not going to dwell on the topic too much, but I feel like I'm talking about it a lot at the moment. AI. Very, very briefly, what's your take on how AI may change art and or music? And yeah, is it a good? I mean, it's inevitable. So whether it's good or bad is probably neither here nor there. But yeah, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, music, art, everything, absolutely everything in our lives will change because of it, and have already, and will continue to. Good or bad, I guess, that would be a question for someone in the 70s understanding the technology we have 5 years ago before AI came in, and asking them, do you think this is good or bad? Because you lose some things, you gain some things. Just different, just different. And I guess you can make it good or bad yourself. It depends on how we utilize it. It depends on I think we just know it will change. Yeah, it's all we know. Yeah.
I think my theory is that it's the humanity in art that we're drawn to as much as the sonics or the visuals, whatever, and hopefully that it'll never get to a point where AI replaces it entirely, supplements it certainly. Maybe it will replace it in some points, but in the same way that CGI hasn't replaced actors, hopefully CGI won't replace cellists and bass players and drummers and composers and sound designers.
I kind of feel like the need to connect with something real, and people that are real doing something real, will grow in terms of it almost becoming a niche market, and then perhaps becoming wider. And the, say, electronic side of music, which is a music that I love personally, that might even just go way deeper into the world of AI and creating music that humans can't even make, and you'll go for that experience, like Eric Pryde's Hollow show, but on steroids, and something that a human at the center of the stage creating just couldn't even comprehend doing. And you go for the spectacle of it, and just the tech side of it, and how insane and modern it is. But then to want to just sit with a person and an acoustic guitar singing a song for you, I think people always want that, and I think in real life will become even more so, because as you mentioned, they'll be able to generate someone singing a song on an acoustic guitar, and it will be pretty much real. And looking at it through your screen or your headset or whatever it is, you probably will get to a point where you're just not able to discern, is this real or not? And I kind of want to know that it is. So put a human in front of me that's actually has lived some stories, and I want them to talk to me about stories, rather than me questioning whether this is just a regurgitation of everything that's happened in music up until now. Yeah.
Well, I suppose, that's ultimately maybe what it boils down to, is our desire to hear stories, and that goes from, advertising telling a story, to music, to art in some way, and hopefully that human lived experience is critical to that. Getting a taste. Obviously, you've mentioned Dave Grohl as a huge influence, but who are some of the artists or some of the albums that have been seminal in terms of your creative development over the years?
Starting off with Dave Grohl and Nirvana, that was a huge one for me. Nevermind. As a young kid, that was something that really was a giant shift. I think I'd been listening to pop and R&B and all these kind of anything that was just going on the radio. And then once I heard Nirvana, I wanted to just dive into that world and get into heavier bands, and I guess even going to Pearl Jam or Mudhoney, or I just wanted to dive into that world, and that was probably the first time that I wanted to scratch below the surface of what was just playing without me actively pursuing it. And then I moved into heavier music, so a band like, say, Deftones or Tool were a huge influence on me as a teenager and a young adult. That was all the music I listened to. I just got a little bit heavier, but I always liked melody in my music and groove. So those kind of bands were a huge influence for me. I'm sure baked into my musical DNA, melodically at least. And then probably the other biggest shift that happened in my life, or definitely I would say the biggest musical shift in my life, was going to see Chemical Brothers live. And that was, definitely that night literally changed my life. I decided that was it. I kind of quit the bands that I was in. I went out and bought a G4 Mac and just kind of said, okay, I'm going to be a Chemical Brother now.
Yeah, nice.
Just started diving into the world of electronic music. That was really, I just got it. I knew electronic music had been around me for years, and I was starting to get interested in, not so much electronic, but, bands like Jamiroquai and maybe Fatboy Slim, things like this. But it wasn't until I was on that dance floor with Chemical Brothers live that I kind of just had the moment where it just clicked. I was like, I really understand this properly now. Okay, I get it. I understand why you guys are into this. And then I just, I went to a record store maybe a week or two later and picked up almost every vinyl on the wall, because I didn't know what trance music was, what house music was, what breaks were. I didn't understand any of these genres. I had to just go and pick up one record off the other to listen to them to start to understand what this all meant and find the one that I liked personally. But yeah, there were a few other dance acts, but the Chemical Brothers were really the seminal one that changed my life.
And was it off the back of that you formed the breakbeat duo Bitrock?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So Ollie, my production partner, he also had a complete obsession for Chemical Brothers, and we were both at Music Festival watching Plump DJs play, who are a really great breaks act, and we were both flinging our CDs at the guys on stage with our demos on them while they were trying to DJ and not get killed by us throwing CDs at them. And so we were in the front row. We hadn't met each other before, but we kind of just went, oh, I'll give you one of mine. You can give me one of yours. So we did a CD trade and then came back to each other with a really detailed email with our criteria of each one's production, track by track on the demo CDs. But then we went, oh, okay, well, yeah, you're pretty good and you're pretty good. So maybe why don't we get in the studio and see what we make? And yeah, we got in the studio and made music better than we'd ever made in the studio before in one session, and kind of went, well, okay, we just have to keep doing that. But yeah, they were definitely the inspiration for Bitrock back in the day.
Nice. The imagery of you throwing CDs on stage, it's a bit like there's a scene in Commando where Schwarzenegger throws a circular saw blade at someone's head and it takes the top of the head off, and just that imagery of some guy on stage, all of a sudden there's a CD, takes his scalps him.
Yeah. I used to work at a CD store, so we had these clear plastic slicks that the CDs would go in, so it wasn't a hard case, at least my one. And I got really good at frisbeeing those things from long distances and landing somewhere near the DJ playing on stage. I don't think I injured anyone from memory. I wasn't that good at aim to hit them right square in the forehead. But
excellent. And what about? Is there any sort of particular visual media, movies, TV series or anything like that you feel were, again, seminal in forming your creative taste?
I don't think so. I've always just enjoyed watching. It's never been a case of that it's shaped anything artistically for me, being in music and sound. I've definitely, of course, watched Breaking Bad a few times over and really appreciate deeply cinematography and director's craft when you see it done so well, like a show like that. And movies, of course. I mean, I'm a big movie and TV show fan. I don't find much time to do them these days, to sit down and digest a full series. But, of course, when a really good one comes, I'll find the time. And I definitely miss the days of going regularly to the cinema and having, really not just blockbuster films out, but kind of all of that juicy mid-range of films popping up that were out and just so well done, and going with your friends and sitting and just focusing and enjoying the full experience.
Before our attention spans started to wane.
Yeah, before you needed a phone in your hand at the same time.
It's funny when you say, like, I mean, I think it feels like generally there's, I don't know whether it's an age thing or there's less films being made, and it feels like studios are less prone to taking risk on a film because it's harder to monetize, and as such the output's not quite as good. But obviously that's what counts as that is this renaissance of the box set TV series.
Yeah, like we watched the Gladiator 2 recently, and I was fairly disappointed in it, but particularly in a lot of the CG in there, because you could just see that you would think such a amazing film, and doing the second one and the budgets they would have been able to put together for that. And yeah, I guess they did more out there kind of visual settings, but the craft wasn't quite there in quite a few of them, where it just didn't look real. And I guess, yeah.
Yeah, it's the inherent danger of rebooting, for want of a better term. So, I mean, the original Gladiator was absolutely incredible, and to try and fill those shoes with a sequel is going to be very difficult in terms of measuring up. But obviously, what Hollywood does have with that is there's already a huge audience potentially who would be interested in seeing it, so they don't have to create an audience. So to speak.
Yeah. I'm just kind of a little bit disappointed at some of the CG in there. Whereas the first film, I guess, they of course would have used some, but just going back to that, actually shooting a lot of the things and that authenticity that's there of actual sets and whatnot.
Yeah, and it makes a huge difference. I always think with Game of Thrones, like one of the great things about that was that they were on set. If they're on the wall, they're in a cold environment, so I can tell. It goes back to what you were saying as well about the sound. Is like there's certain visual cues, like when someone's in a cold place, their skin has a slightly different hue and you can see their breath. Whereas if they're filming it in a warehouse and pretending to be cold, it doesn't translate in the same way.
Yeah, and Game of Thrones being one of my other favourite shows, like many people, but yeah, absolutely got obsessed with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was incredibly well done, and I think HBO. I always think of HBO as they're a bastion of quality, because talking about the series, the danger with TV series or streaming services is it's all about the subscription and maintaining the subscription, so therefore the quality of the output isn't as important, because it doesn't have to do well at the box office, it doesn't have to do well. All it has to do is create perceived value so people keep subscribing. And to name no names, but I know that one particular company, if you've got an 8-episode series or 10-episode series, if somebody watches up to 4, that's a success. They don't need to finish it and they don't need to like it. It's like watching 4 episodes is a success, which is a bit of a shame, because it kind of feels like the quality bar drops. But I always think of HBO. Anyway, that's my TV rant over.
I guess it's similar with music. I don't know, maybe music sort of changed in that in the CD era, you only needed to have 1 or 2 good songs, and the win was the person buying the album, and that was enough. Whereas, I don't know, it's transformed now to just being about the song, and I guess the albums do come out, and it's just, it changes, of course, but maybe there's more emphasis on each song needing to stand on its own 2 feet these days, which perhaps is a good thing. Well, I mean, it's definitely a good thing, but I think that's perhaps what we've taken from the way people are consuming music now versus buying albums mostly unheard.
Yeah. Going back to when you sort of talking about going into a record shop and just taking all the vinyl off the wall, I used to love going into the record shop and scanning the CDs and then sort of listening to the CD, auditioning before you buy it.
And I used to work in the CD. My first job out of high school was working at a CD store in Australia called Sanity, and I was there for quite a few years. And I loved, someone would bring an album up to me, and I would be, oh, okay, you like this band? Have you heard of da 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 da? No. Okay. Have you got 5 minutes? And it was genuinely like, I did not care whether I sold the CD or not. I just wanted to turn them on to music that I thought they would love. And then you have to listen to this. They go over and they listen. And I just love that, turning people onto new music. They'd come back and they'd be like, oh yeah, that's good. Okay, sold. I'd be like, okay, have you got 5 more minutes? Like, I've got another one for you. And, and they come, not so much that one. Okay, well, have you tried this one? Oh yeah, I really like that one. So just that process. I guess people, but that exists now by people just sending, sharing a link to a track or an album to each other. So we haven't lost that, but I really enjoyed that moment of actually being able to watch them digest it. It was quite a fun experience.
And that when 7 hours later they're still there in the shop listening to music, you did a pretty good job.
Sometimes I did have people hooked on there for a few hours.
Yeah, that's nice. Awesome. Well, I kind of bring things to a close, Ryan, but I've got a couple of quick fire questions for you. What's your favourite cookie, biscuit?
Cookie, biscuit, I would have to say being Australian, a Tim Tam.
If I could have put money on it, I knew.
Well, I also really love a milk arrowroot. Your more basic kind of version. My parents are English, so I like a milk arrowroot, a very basic one, yeah.
What is that? I don't know that.
I thought that was British, but maybe it's Australian. It's just like it's just a straight up, kind of slightly sweet biscuit.
Oh, okay. I think I know.
A lot of people would dip it in their tea.
Absolutely, yeah. They've got dunkability, high dunkability. What's a little known fact about you?
I once did 1,000 sit-ups straight in a sit-up-a-thon.
A sit-up-a-thon. How did that come about?
When I was a kid, I did Taekwondo. Not very well and not for that long, but one of the things they did was a sit-up-a-thon. And I don't know. I had a small frame back then. I was quite young. I think it was maybe 7 or 8, but I don't know how I did it. I definitely couldn't even do 100 now, but I did manage that once.
Even 50 would be a struggle, let alone 100, let alone 1,000. But yeah, I suppose when you're a kid, the rules are different, aren't they?
Yeah, you're not lifting up too much weight.
No. What scares you?
Heights. Yeah.
To what extent? As in, can you go up in a skyscraper or not?
Yeah, I can. It's more about if there's adequate railing, adequate safety. If I'm kind of looking over the edge of something and there's nothing between me and the edge, that freaks me out.
Probably understandably. Even weirdly, I had that when I tried a VR unit.
Oh, yeah, that would...
Even though I'm standing on solid floor in the middle of a room, just the perception of me being on this tower, but there's nothing... I think I was on a high dive board and it was very, very narrow. It's crazy how, you're scared even that you can't reason beyond that logic.
Yeah, I was up I think it's the CN Tower in Canada. I was up there with my dad and they have a glass, kind of very clear glass floor area where you kind of look down. And it's so foreign to walk on that and just look at a giant drop underneath you.
And finally, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I would say trusting that you don't have to follow the traditional path. You can just back yourself a bit and know that if you work hard and have a plan and know what you enjoy doing, you can really just push for that much earlier in life. I kind of had to hit a point where I was pretty unhappy in life before I was willing to take that dive. But I could have done it many years earlier, and maybe lived many more years of doing what I love doing. Even though I've had a really good run at it, I could have maybe made an even larger chunk of my adult life just waking up every day doing what I love.
Yeah. Do you think you have to go through that period of pushing yourself to a breaking point, or being unhappy? Is that the fuel that pushes you out?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. I think for the first time, I think you need to live through it once to understand that it can function. And for any sane person to just take that leap, it's a pretty big step to take. So yeah, I mean, I had to kind of hit a point where I just didn't feel like I had much of a choice about it. I just kind of went, well, it's, that's it. I'm going for it. I really don't care. I really don't care what the repercussions are at all. But before that, I never would have dreamed of it. And now, having done it, it's like, yeah, absolutely. Just go for it. Take some time off, and chase whatever you want to do, and you'll work it out. And there were definitely hard times getting there. There was times when I was working cash in hand, doing stock taking at 5 a.m. For 2 or 3 hours shift for $20 an hour, and catching the train. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't an easy path, but you push through those hard periods, and then you get there. You find a way. Yeah.
To be honest, mate, $20 an hour, I think that highlights the difference in wage structure between Australia and the UK, because that would have been about £2.50.
Oh wow! Yeah, okay.
But no, that's a lovely sentiment to end things on. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
Where can people find Made by Ikigai, One Stop, and Ryan Dickinson?
Yeah, I would say just www.madebyikigai.com. Is the place you can find us on the web. And you could also reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, Ryan Dickinson. And that's probably the two best ways. We're on Instagram as well, but it's early days there.
Nice. Ryan, thanks so much.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, and given that you've listened this far, I feel you might have, then I would be honoured and incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe, rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. By subscribing, you'll automatically be notified each time a new episode drops, and by rating the show, you tell the artificial intelligence that will soon be running the world that this podcast is worth listening to. I certainly get a lot of insights and value from these conversations, and I genuinely hope you do too. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, then you can email me, podcast@larpmusic.com. Larpmusic.com is my digital abode, and the home of the podcast is larpmusic.com/Sync Music Matters Podcast. And Sync Music Matters Podcast is hyphenated. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.